as the Rettendon murders, occurred on December 6th of 1995, when three notorious drug dealers, Tony Tucker, Patrick Tate and Craig Rolfe, were found shot dead in a Range Rover parked on a remote farm track in Rettendon, Essex in England. The case remains one of the most infamous and talked about gangland killings in British history, leading to numerous books, films and documentaries. 2 men were jailed for the killings, but now a 4-year case review conducted by a former Met Police DCI is casting doubt on the guilt of the jailed men. Welcome back to Crime Chronicles. Stay tuned as we look at the Essex boys, their murders, and the newly uncovered evidence that might lead to the case being reopened after almost 30 years. In the early 1990s, the UK saw a significant rise in drug-related crime, particularly with the introduction and rapid spread of ecstasy and other party drugs. With rave culture at its peak, the demand for recreational drugs was skyrocketing. In Essex, a group of criminals emerged who were willing to meet that demand with ruthless efficiency, and among them were Tony Tucker, Patrick Tate and Craig Rolfe. Tony Tucker was the leader of the group, a former bouncer who became heavily involved in the drug scene. Tucker started his career as a nightclub bouncer in Southend-on-Sea and quickly gained a reputation for being tough and fearless. He soon moved into the drug trade, capitalizing on the booming rave scene. Tucker was known for his extravagant lifestyle, driving flashy cars and wearing expensive clothes, all funded by his illicit activities. His connections in the nightclub scene made him the perfect supplier for the ecstasy tablets that fueled the all-night parties. Patrick Tate was another key figure in the gang. Tate had a long criminal history, including convictions for armed robbery and drug offences. He was known for his violent temper and unpredictable behaviour, which made him both feared and respected within the criminal underworld. Tate had served time in prison, and while he was banged up, his second-hand car business was handed over to Tucker. The pair had formed a close bond that would later evolve into a deadly partnership. Finally, there was Craig Rolfe, the youngest of the trio. Rolfe was a former football hooligan and petty criminal with a heavy cocaine habit. He acted as a driver and enforcer for Tucker and Tate. Rolfe was deeply entrenched in the drugs trade and was known for his loyalty to Tucker and Tate. The gang's activities extended beyond drug dealing, also being involved in protection rackets, extortion, and money laundering. On December 6th of 1995, the bodies of Tony Tucker, Patrick Tate and Craig Rolfe were discovered in a Range Rover parked on a remote farm track near Rettendon in Essex. Each had been shot execution style. The crime scene was gruesome. The blue Range Rover, parked on a secluded track known locally as Workhouse Lane, was splattered with blood. The bodies of Tucker and Rolfe were slumped in the front seats, while Tate's body lay sprawled across the back seat. All 3 men had been shot in the head and upper body, suggesting a calculated and premeditated attack. The location of the murders added to the mystery. Workhouse Lane was a quiet, rural area, far removed from the bustling nightlife where the gang usually operated. This led investigators to believe that the victims had been lured to the location under false pretenses, possibly for a meeting or a drug deal that went wrong. The investigation into the Essex boys murders quickly became one of the most high-profile cases in British criminal history. Detectives faced numerous challenges, including a lack of witnesses and the victims' extensive criminal connections, which provided a long list of potential suspects. Several theories emerged about the motive behind the killings. One of the most prominent was that the murders were the result of a drug deal gone wrong. The victims were known to have been involved in a large-scale ecstasy importation operation, and it was speculated that they had crossed paths with other criminal organizations, leading to their execution. Another theory suggested that the murders were a result of internal gang disputes. The volatile personalities of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe had led to conflicts, and there were rumours of betrayal and power struggles within the gang. This theory was supported by the fact that Patrick Tate had reportedly expressed concerns about his safety in the weeks leading up to the murders. Several individuals were considered suspects during the investigation. Michael Steele and Jack Womes were known associates of the victims and were eventually charged and convicted of the murders. The prosecution argued that Steele, a drug smuggler, and Womes, his accomplice, had executed the three men over a drug-related dispute. Darren Nichols was a former associate of Steele and Womes, who turned informant for the police. He claimed to have been the getaway driver on the night of the murders and provided key testimony that led to the conviction of Steele and Womes. The trial of Michael Steele and Jack Womes began in 1997 at the Old Bailey, London's Central Criminal Court. The prosecution's case relied heavily on the testimony of Darren Nichols, who claimed that he had driven Steele and Womes to the murder scene and witnessed them carrying out the killings. Nichols' testimony was controversial, as it was largely uncorroborated and relied on his credibility as a former criminal turned informant. However, the prosecution argued that his account was consistent with the forensic evidence and other details of the case. In 1998, Steele and Womes were convicted of the murders and sentenced to life imprisonment, with a recommendation of a minimum term of 25 years. The verdict was met with mixed reactions, as some believed that the convictions were based on shaky evidence and the unreliable testimony of a former criminal. Despite the convictions of Steele and Womes, numerous theories and speculations continue to surround the Essex Boys murders. Some believe that the real killers were never caught, and that the case was more complex than the official narrative suggests. Former Met Police DCI David McKelvey, whose private investigation firm, TMI, spent 4 years reviewing the case, believes an independent police force should now reinvestigate the murders. McKelvey, who worked on the original investigation, admitted the convictions of Jack Womes and Michael Steele are not 100% certain. McKelvey's case review says that footprints of a different suspected gunman have been identified, casting further doubt over the convictions of two men for the killings. The case review has spotted Reebok trainer footprints in the snow where the shooter would have stood. Mr. McKelvey says the evidence, caught in the police crime scene photographs, was previously missed, and claims it supports the account of an East End crook who told police he was the getaway driver. Billy Jasper claimed early in the investigation that he had acted as a getaway driver for a named assassin, and that the killer wore Reebok trainers. The police never followed up Jasper's claims. Steele and Womes were both wearing Wellington boots on the night of the killing, and prints of this type of boot were never found at the crime scene. It has also emerged that Darren Nichols, the supergrass whose evidence convicted Steele and Womes, admitted he was coached by police into what to say at trial. Womes was released after serving 23 years of a 25-year sentence, and Steele is currently going through the parole process, but is still in prison. The new bombshell evidence in this case definitely needs a closer look, and might lead to the case being reviewed. Were the wrong men jailed for the Essex Boys murders? Only time will tell. Thank you for joining us today on Crime Chronicles. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the channel with your friends.